How do you take a 600-page tome of a technical manual and, well, reduce that down to about 10% of its size and still be effective? Well, that's what we're going to be exploring in this week's episode of the Data Radio Show. Hello there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Data Radio Show. Back in 2000, Dan Lindstedt released the basis for Data Vault, a warehousing system that he's created from his work that he was doing at the time in Lockheed Martin. It's a system that's really popular around the world for just how much it can incorporate data and the changing face of what data brings us. But 600 pages in a technical manual is a lot for people to dive into. And of course, if you're an expert working in the field, you're going to get there. But for people who are just starting to look into the field or who are kind of curious about how it all works, well, now there's a new introduction to Data Vault out, being written here by the guest that we've got on the show today, Hernan Revale. Now, he took that 600-page tome and turned it into a 60-page intro book, and that in itself can be a bit challenging. But he had some of the best resources around him, including one of the co-authors of some of the original work. So I decided to have a little chat to Hernan over the last couple of days, and yeah, it was a really fascinating conversation to learn about the process. So let's jump over there now. But before we do that, make sure you hit that like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel so you can keep up to date with all of the information that we're putting out there all of the time. There's so much content. So yeah, let's go jump over and have a chat to Hernan. Hernan, thank you very much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. You've been busy. You've been writing.
I did. Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell me about the book that you've written. It's all about Data Vault, which is obviously a fascinating topic. I'm really curious to know what your logic was behind writing the book, what it was you wanted to achieve.
Okay, so yeah, we call it the Data Vault Handbook because I wouldn't call it a book. It's quite short for being a complete book. It's 60-page long. A5 size, you can see here. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the idea was that we saw here at Scalefree there was a gap between all the scattered posts that you can see online related to data vaults, which are like really informing, but maybe it's not a cohesive like piece of information, right? Just like different topics, people talking about different topics on data vault. And then we have what we call the Data Vault Bible, right? The big 600 plus book that was more than 10 years ago by Dan Lichten and Michael Olshinke. So basically we saw this gap. And it's like, okay, if you see yourself that you want to learn about data vault from scratch, you don't know much, maybe you are an analyst, data engineer, whatever, but you don't know much about data vaults. Where would you go? Like the book feels like a big step, like maybe too much for people. So it's a barrier. For sure, if then you start to work with data vault, you will need to have the book on your side, right? Like the big book. But this is kind of an entry point, like an introduction to data vault. That was the idea. And so people probably need to have some idea of data engineering, analytics, like data warehousing in general, data platforms. But we build on top of that some of the entry points of data vault. So the idea is like, okay, what are the core concepts that data vaults represents, right? So because you can be talking about data vault in many, many ways for a very long time, like 600 plus pages, as you know. So like, how can we like prune it into like the main core components, just to make it more accessible for people? Basically, that was the idea.
So what's the starting point then for how you pick what to prune?
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, you start with a 600-page book and say, okay, do we need everything from here? Is everything is quite like you can take this old book and it's still like quite relevant right now, right? Is maybe there are things that they could be updated, but it's quite up to date. And basically the idea was like I was basically also putting myself in the shoes of someone who wants to start to learn data vault, and what is the piece of content I would like to have in my hands at the moment, which I didn't. So we started thinking, okay, there are some things that you need to know if you start to work with data vault. Let's say house links and satellites, you need to know that. You need to have an idea of the three-layer architecture. Um, then so I think the idea for me was quite clear, like how was going to be the structure. It was like, okay, let's have some introduction on why data vaults, why we use it, what are like the pains that they address, and then the next chapters, they were quite simple to define because they are basically what we call the data vault pillars, right? Which are these three pillars. We start with architecture in this case, then modeling, and then methodology. And also it makes sense to go in that order because you kind of build on top of what you already explained in the chapter before. So
Hmm.
there was also like some specific decision because it's kind of like the egg and the chicken. You're like trying to think, okay, I need to say this, but you need to understand this first. So yeah, how you build on top and you go in order. But it's also a book that you can have also on the side of your desk, and you just go to a chapter that you need to refresh. So it's also something that you can jump around. It's not a problem.
When you were putting this together, obviously you're aware of the 600-page book. You know it inside out at this stage. Was there anything that you learned in this process that kind of surprised you, or that was a good refresher for you around how Data Vault works, or even just around the process of creating a piece like this, an informative piece?
So yes, for sure, I got some surprises. So um, let's think about it. Like I I'm working with Data Vault for the last 2 years and a half. I went like full in. I really like to learn what I'm doing and go deep. So mainly my way of learning Data Vault is also, okay, we do this, the how, I understand it, but why, right? And this is also what I wanted to have it on the book, why we are doing the things we do. Otherwise, it looks like just because, right? Maybe it's not super clear why we are doing. And even though I'm a curious person, even though I have some time on like working with data vault, maybe not a lot, but some like 2 years and a half, I was still surprising myself having some conversations with Michael Oshinke, which is like for me the reference on this topic, like discovering some things that they were not completely true of my preconceptions on them. Like uh, maybe I don't know why we have reference hubs and satellites. And, when I was trying to explain them on the book, then Michael also came to give me some feedback. That was super important to have Michael read from top to bottom. And like it wasn't wrong what I was explaining, but maybe I was like putting the more like attention into things that they were not that important, of like why we are using this kind of concept, why we use hashing and stuff like that. So they are like conversations that are still now quite interesting in the data world. So it helped me to get even a better foundation. For me, also this process are really fun. I'm used to explain stuff. I used to be a uni teacher, also a researcher, so I'm used to break down like complex topics into like their minimum components, and then to build on top of that to transmit what you're wanting to say. It could be written, it could be like in a presentation, in a live presentation. So that was the idea also of Data Vault. And yeah, for me also it was surprising at some degree that I was also like learning on the way a lot. Um, so yeah, I really enjoyed that process. It was really nice.
With Michael, you have a resource on hand who is obviously very heavily involved with the creation of Data Vault. Um, has he read it, and has he given you feedback on it?
Yeah. Like there was a point when I already had, I would say 90% of the book written, and that's when he jumped in. So yeah, I have like a lot of like little comments, even because he he wrote the big book that we know of data. Also, there is a lot of thought, in particular in data engineering, right? Is how you use words. So there is some little details that maybe I didn't realize or I took it for granted. And Michael has this learning of like writing this book 10 years ago, 10 year plus probably, and having a lot of feedback also on that. So he also learn from their mistakes, and also that he was generous enough to transmit this learning. So yeah, he made comments, I would say, on almost on every page at some degree, but mostly in the architecture and modeling parts. uh, then methodology, we kind of innovate a bit. I can explain it later. But yeah, architecture and modeling, there was like some little details. I wouldn't say they were like core wrong concepts, but it's just like things to make it even better. That's why, when I write it, again, I'm 2 years and a half in this area. So it's like, I wouldn't say I'm the most expert, but I've been working, I've been in multiple projects implementing data also. I understand what I'm saying. But of course, I'm not Michael, I'm not Dan. And after like having these observations from Michael and like integrating these changes into the book, they was like, okay, now it is a really nice handbook. Now I feel really confident to publish this, to start to talk about like this and to offer it to whoever wants to get into data because I think it's a really good piece of information from data because there are like some topics that sometimes you can have different like ways of approaching them, and
Hmm.
having Michael will say like, okay, this is the best way, it will just give it more confidence. Yeah.
The book itself, the original one that Michael and Dan worked on, it's a few years ago now. Obviously, things have changed and moved on, and processes and technologies evolved. Data Vault 2.1 is starting to be rolled out around the place as well. Was there any kind of was this an opportunity for somebody like Michael as well to sit there and go, well, this is actually a little bit out of date now. This has changed slightly. This methodology we've updated now.
The thing is that the book is really good. Like the 2.0 book is amazing because you keep grabbing it, like coming back to it when you have like some question and stuff like that, and it's still really valid. And as it is a way of working, right? With is this framework, we call it a system of business intelligence. So, but at the end, it's like, yeah, how you organize your work, and it's tool agnostic, as we say, so it's not tied to a specific tool, even though the 2.0 book is showing it some examples, implementation example in a specific tool. Um, so maybe that's the most outdated part, I would say, the implementation part, because maybe the tools now, yeah, we are more in the cloud, so you can have different ways of implementing. But then it's like probably you will need a book per tool stack. So yeah, like I think it's still really valid because the core concepts, and even with this jump to 2.1, you see, like, this is why they also don't call it 3.0, right? Because it's still like the core is in 2.0, is enough. Of course, you can build on top of that. You can, yeah, like updates related. For instance, we brought some new topics for it. It could be we in the architecture part, we have a small section. Well, everything is small. We have 60 pages, right? But we have a small section related to data mesh,
Mhm.
which is a discussion from the last years. So I think it didn't even exist back then. And on the yeah, the methodology part, I didn't want to repeat what's in the book, like in the big book, because I think it's already quite complete, and you can like there is a lot of agile stuff which are like super valid. You totally need to know them if you want to. I would say work not even in data, or in any data engineering project. Of course, they are like specialized, like personalized to data vault in the original book. But in our case, it's like, okay, let's try to bring maybe some new concepts on the methodology part. So it was the part that we were there to play a bit more. So we brought these concepts of discipline agile, sorry. So it's a bit more of an update of the typical agile concept. I like it because it's a bit more practical, and also we talk about this conversation about project versus product mindsets, like what is, yeah. So I think it's really important to have this on mind when you're like creating a data platform and data warehousing projects. It's like, are you creating a product, or are you like project based? Like how is that going to work? Probably you should be on the product side, right? Because it's something that is going to be evolving all the time. And then finally, we also have a subsection related to roles that maybe it was touched in the original book, but in this case, yeah, we also dare to do it on our way. And in this case, I also went through my colleagues, which are also consultants, jumping from project to project in different areas. So I think that practical experience that Scale3 brings into this handbook is really nice, because we have like dozens of different views of like dozens of different projects. So we just condense this knowledge into this handbook. Yeah.
What's the feedback been from the colleagues, from the people you work with around it?
So far, I'm not sure if they're just being nice to me, but it's like really positive. Yeah, I have other colleagues like senior consultants reading the book and give me some feedback before like publishing it. That was also like really valuable. But then after we publish it, yeah, I have like uh, different kinds of colleagues and people that they went through it, and it's like, yeah, this is, this is what I feel I was needing when I was starting to learn data vault, and that's the goal. That was the goal. Like again, we the benchmark is like the best thing is the data vault 2.0 book. Like it's not an idea to replace it. It's just like the ideal, right? It's like, okay, if you go deeper into every subject, you will end up with 600 pages of knowledge. It's because it's so deep. Um, but okay, let's try to make it as short as possible just to make it accessible, but with the minimum core concepts of data vault to have a real understanding of like what we talk about when we talk about data vault, because people usually get stick into this data vault 1.0 idea, which is also only the modeling part. So you talk about house-link satellite, which is fair because it's like a big component and it's one of the most distinct components of data vault, but is for sure is a key part to understand the other pillars that we talk about: architecture, methodology. So here, yeah, we wanted to touch everything. We also wanted to tell a story a little bit. Of course, we couldn't play a lot with that, but at least in the modeling part, we use an examples and we start to build on top of this example. So it's like kind of a data warehouse for a hospital or like this kind of setting. And yeah, like we go through this story. So I think it's start to click in your head, or that's the idea. That okay, you understand, okay, the hubs is this concept, the satellite is this concept, the link is mapping these relationships, and then maybe more complex what we call, yeah, derived entities, which could be an unhistorized link and other kind of stuff, or pits and bridges for the business worlds and stuff like that. And yeah, like you cannot present pit and bridges if you don't understand, for instance, the business worlds, like the architecture layer. So there is a lot of things that they talk with each other, and the idea was, okay, we go in an order that makes sense, that you can build on top of what you are reading before. Yeah.
Have you, because I realize Scale Free brings in a lot of students who are studying and working towards a practical element of their degrees. Have you given it to them and got their feedback on it as well?
So yeah, like we have during the year like different moments that they come in, the students, and yes, like they have access to the book. Is like we are also like giving them for free. You can like, I think if you're in Europe, you can get the physical copy. You can just ask for it and on our website. Otherwise, if you are like in Australia, you can just get it online, like kind of a PDF document. So yeah, it's like the idea was also to have some tools, some material to use it internally. So yes, the students also went through it. Even I got some feedback, because of course it's not that you always need to understand data vault to give me feedback. Also, if you don't understand it, it's like the, how was for you this experience, like, so it kind of a user experience test. So yeah, it was also interesting to talk with the students, like how was for them, and I think they are like quite happy with the results. Yeah.
Um, so who was this aimed for, and how can people get it? Easiest way to track it down.
So we have in our website, so you can just Google data vault handbook scale free, and you
Mm-hmm.
will probably end up in the, like, the first option will be our website, where you can just order order it in two ways. You can get the digital copy online, or if you are, I think if you are in Europe, you can order the physical copy, and they will be sending it for you for free. So yeah, for us is just a way to, okay, spread the data world word, and also related to, for instance, the kind of the presentations that we do for free, the webinars. So it's just another piece of material. And funny enough, this actually started with Christoph, which is our CEO, asking me to write a white paper, and then it's like it evolved from a white paper, like 10-page white paper, to a 60-page handbook.
That's growth. That's definitely growth.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
has Dan Lindstedt had a chance to look over it or offered you feedback on it?
Uh, so far, I guess no. As far as I know, would be nice to have some feedback from them. Yeah,
Yeah,
like yeah,
he's a busy
Michael.
man.
Yeah, yeah, he's a busy man. Exactly. I can imagine he's seeing constantly people writing about data online. So probably he also needs to like direct his energy where like things makes more sense for him for like his daily basis.
That makes sense. He knows it inside out. I was talking to him, must be about 18 months ago now. And like we've done a little bit around 2.1 coming out and the training rolling out for it. I said to him, well, when do we get version 3? And he just looked at me and goes, no, no, never going to happen. No. So, yeah, I imagine if it took him this long to get to 2.1, yeah, he probably doesn't have time to sit down and read some books like that.
Yeah, I was also surprised. Like we had a 2.1 training coming out at
Mhm.
Scalefree, and it's a 6-day training. Like compared to the bootcamp that it was a 2.0, is double. So three online, three on site. Um, so yeah, it's a lot of content. So I can imagine how was the process of creating all this stuff. So 3.0 sounds like how many days you will need
Oh, yeah.
to learn all the
Give it a
stuff. Yeah.
decade. Give it a decade, it'll be fine. But with 2.1 coming out or out now, does that mean a sequel for the book at some point?
I'm really into like building on top of that. So I talked with Michael about that, and he liked this agile idea of writing. So it's not that we need to write one master book and that's
Hmm.
it for the rest of time. So you can write a first version of the book and then iterate on top of that and make it better. So in this case, as we have like a virtual copy, there's no cost. We have the printed copy, but again, it's not that we are printing tens of thousands of copies, so it's also not a big problem if we come up with new versions of it. And for sure, when I was writing, I was always thinking, okay, I'm leaving this on the side, I'm leaving this on the side, and it's like I really want to put it because it's still relevant to data vault. I don't want to end up creating the same, like a
Yeah.
second level version of the data vault 2.0 book, because I think it's already amazing. So I don't want to repeat that. So it's like I also need to control myself how much I want to put into this book. And it probably makes sense, as you're saying, Paul, that okay, let's bring the core components of data for someone to learn, and also maybe the new topics,
Yeah.
because again, people are talking about them, but it's quite scattered, this conversation. So for sure, you will need a training if you want to understand it very well, but it's also good to have some like um, some little book or a handbook that goes through also these new concepts and more modern discussions of data vaults and what is happening right now, like data fabric, data mesh, like clouds and stuff like that, data platforms. So yeah, I think it could make sense.
So it sounds like there's so much information there that you could end up with a Data Vault version of Lord of the Rings. Start off with The Hobbit and then go into that trilogy and then the Similarian and movies and video games. I'm sure that's right around the corner.
Yeah, totally. Like maybe I end up writing also like the history of data, all like interviewing Dan and Michael, because I think there's nothing written on that, so that could be interesting.
Yeah. Actually, that'd be a really good one. We're actually just about to launch a series on the school classroom around the history of data management and looking at some of the people behind the tools that we use these days. People like Edgar Codd and Grace Turner and stuff like that. And some of the really fascinating stuff. I don't think we've actually got anything lined up yet on Dan and Michael because they're still like, larger than life figures. I've spoken to them, which kind of feels weird to put them into a history class.
And And I think it's really important. Again, I'm quite new in this area. I was in analytics before jumping into Data Vault and business intelligence in general. But in general, I'm just like 34, so I haven't been like other colleagues that they could be 20 plus years on the area. So I think sometimes when you jump of like a train that is already moving, it's also interesting to understand how things evolved into the point where you are right now, right? It's like, okay, let's say you have a new trainee that is working in the cloud. Okay, why we end up in the cloud? Like, how were the things before, and what are the problems that these new technologies, methodologies, frameworks are solving? So I think it's really interesting to have an idea. It's not that you need to know everything about everything, but to have an idea of the history, I think it also makes a lot of sense, particularly also as a consultant, right? Because you need to understand what are the pains that we are solving, like why. Again, we are coming back to the beginning, the answering the why we are doing this stuff. And part of knowing the history, how we evolved into, for instance, Data Vault 2.0, 2.1, is also like a good way to understand like how we are solving like these modern problems, or maybe the old problems in a modern way.
Love it. I think it's a great place to wrap everything up. This has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Hey, I want to thank Hernan for joining me again this week. Absolutely fascinating to sit down and have a look at the process that he went through and how you could take something so technical and make it so accessible. It was really interesting. As he said, you can access that particular document on the ScaleFree website for free anywhere in the world. That's just scalefree.com. So maybe go give it a go, have a look at it if you're considering learning a little bit more about Data Vault and other management options that are out there. Anyway, make sure you look after yourselves. Until next time, live long, prosper, be one with the force. We'll catch you guys all next week.